If your TV and soundbar are connected with an optical cable right now, there's a very good chance you've accidentally disabled Dolby Atmos, limited your surround sound to basic compressed 5.1, and lost useful features like one remote volume control, all without anyone telling you this was happening. The optical cable came in the box, you plugged it in, the sound worked, and that was that. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If your TV supports eARC and your soundbar or receiver supports Atmos, using optical is like buying a sports car and only ever driving it in first gear. Everything is there, you're just not accessing it. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what you're missing, why the difference is more significant than most people expect, and how to fix it in about 5 minutes. Subscribe and hit that like button before we get into this. And tell me in the comments what connection you're currently using between your TV and your sound system, optical, ARC, eARC, or something else, and whether you've ever had issues with Atmos not working properly. Let's get into it. The 3 connections explain clearly. To understand why this matters, we need to be clear about what each of these 3 connections actually does, because the names are confusing and the marketing around them rarely explains the real differences in plain language. Let's start with optical, which is also called Toslink. This is a cable that carries audio as pulses of light through a thin fiber cable. It's been around since the 1980s, it's reliable, it's simple, and for its time, it was genuinely impressive technology. But optical has a hard ceiling on how much audio data it can carry, roughly 384 kilobits per second for multi-channel audio. Within that ceiling, it handles stereo PCM and compressed surround formats like Dolby Digital and DTs at up to 5.1 channels perfectly well. Beyond that ceiling, it physically cannot go. No Dolby Atmos, no lossless audio formats, no object-based surround, no control signals. If you ask optical to carry any of those things, it simply doesn't. The format gets downgraded before it leaves the TV, and what arrives at your soundbar is a smaller, compressed version of what was actually in the source. HDMI ARC came along to solve the inconvenience of needing a separate audio cable from your TV back to your sound system. ARC stands for Audio Return Channel, and it uses the same HDMI cable that's already carrying video from your source or receiver to your TV to simultaneously carry audio back in the opposite direction. ARC's bandwidth is around 1 megabit per second for audio, which is roughly 3 times what optical offers. That improvement is enough to add one important capability that optical can't do: compress Dolby Atmos via Dolby Digital Plus, which is the format streaming services like Netflix and Disney Plus use when they deliver Atmos content. ARC also adds HDMI set control, which is the feature that lets your TV remote control your soundbar's volume and power. And it handles lip sync better than optical does in most setups. HDMI eARC is where the real upgrade lives. The E stands for enhanced, and the bandwidth increase is substantial, up to around 37 megabits per second, which is more than 30 times what standard ARC supports and roughly 100 times what optical can carry. That bandwidth unlocks everything that optical and ARC can't handle: lossless Dolby TrueHD, DTS HD Master Audio, full object-based Dolby Atmos from Blu-ray discs, DTS X, and uncompressed multi-channel LPCM audio up to 7.1 channels. eARC also has more reliable handshaking between devices, better lip sync control, and all the same SEC features as standard ARC. Think of optical as a narrow country road with a strict speed limit. ARC is a regular 2-lane road. ARC is a wide expressway with no congestion and no format restrictions. The destination is the same, but what gets to arrive and how much of it is completely different. What you're actually losing with optical? Now let's make this concrete, because the bandwidth numbers are only meaningful if you understand what they translate to in your actual listening experience. The most significant loss with optical is Dolby Atmos from any source that uses lossless encoding. When you play a 4K Blu-ray disc, the Atmos audio on that disc uses Dolby TrueHD, which is a lossless format that can carry up to 18 megabits per second of audio data. Optical's 384 kilobit ceiling is roughly 47 times too small to carry that signal. So, what happens? The TV receives the lossless TrueHD Atmos track from your Blu-ray player, attempts to pass it to your soundbar, and the optical connection forces it down to a basic Dolby Digital 5.1 track before it leaves the TV. Your soundbar receives something that resembles surround sound, but all the Atmos height information, all the object-based positioning, and all the lossless detail is completely gone. The movie still plays, the sound still comes out, but what you're hearing is a fraction of what's actually on the disc. With optical, you also lose Atmos from streaming services. This one surprises people because the streaming version of Atmos uses Dolby Digital Plus rather than TrueHD, which is compressed enough to fit within eARC's bandwidth. But it still doesn't fit through optical. Optical can only carry the older Dolby Digital format, not Dolby Digital Plus, which means even the compressed streaming version of Atmos is blocked. If you're using optical and your TV's streaming apps offer Atmos, that Atmos is not reaching your soundbar. You're getting standard Dolby Digital 5.1 at best. The control limitations with optical are also a real daily frustration that people often don't connect to the cable choice. Without HDMI SEC, which optical cannot carry at all, your TV remote has no way to communicate with your soundbar. Volume control requires a separate remote. Auto power on when the TV turns on often doesn't work. Lip sync adjustment options in your TV's menu may not apply correctly to optical output. These are small inconveniences individually, but they add up to a setup that feels less integrated and more manual than it should be for equipment that was clearly designed to work together seamlessly. The moment people usually discover the problem, the scenario that reveals this problem most dramatically is sitting down with a 4K Blu-ray player connected to a TV, the TV connected to an Atmos soundbar or AVR via optical, and watching the front panel of that receiver or soundbar while a movie starts. With optical, the display reads Dolby Digital or DD, a format that has been around since the 1990s. When you switch the connection to eARC and play the same disc, the display changes to Dolby TrueHD or Dolby Atmos. That visible change on the front panel is a direct indicator of what's actually being decoded, and it confirms in real time that your expensive Atmos system was receiving and decoding a 1990s era compressed format, while a far superior signal was available at the source. Many people discover this by accident. They upgrade their soundbar to an Atmos model, connect it with the optical cable that came in the box because that's the simplest setup, and then wonder why the Atmos experience doesn't match what they expected. The soundbar is capable, the content is Atmos, but the connection is cutting the audio off before it can reach the decoder. This is not a theoretical problem, and it's not rare. It's the most common audio setup mistake in modern home theaters, and it happens because optical cables ship with soundbars as a convenience for users who don't have HDMI outputs, without adequate explanation that optical is the wrong choice for anyone who actually wants to experience what the soundbar is capable of. When optical is actually fine, to be fair about this, optical is not the wrong choice for every situation. If your TV is older and genuinely doesn't have any HDMI ARC or eARC port, optical is your best available option, and it will deliver perfectly functional audio for basic surround and stereo listening. If your soundbar is a simple 2.1 or 3.1 system without Atmos support, the format limitations of optical don't matter because that soundbar can't use lossless Atmos anyway. For watching news, sports, YouTube content, or anything that's produced in standard stereo or basic Dolby Digital, optical carries the signal correctly and you're not losing anything meaningful. The problem is specifically when you have modern Atmos-capable gear, a TV with eARC support, and you're still using optical out of habit or because it came in the box. In that specific situation, optical is preventing your system from performing at the level you paid for. If you've spent money on an Atmos soundbar or a proper AV receiver setup, and your TV has an eARC port, there is no good reason to be using optical. The analogy that fits is watching 4K content on a 1080p screen. The source is better than what you're seeing. The equipment could show you more, but the limiting factor in the middle is holding the whole thing back. How to switch from optical to eARC and verify it's working? Let's walk through the actual steps to make this switch. Because there are a few things beyond just changing the cable that need to be correctly configured for eARC to work properly. The first step is confirming that both your TV and your soundbar or receiver have ARC capability. On your TV, look for an HDMI port labeled ARC or ARC on the back or side panel. Most modern televisions made in the last 4 to 5 years have at least one, and some have a specific port labeled ARC to distinguish it from standard ARC ports. On your soundbar or receiver, look for an HDMI input labeled ARC, eARC, or HDMI out ARC, depending on whether it's a soundbar or a full receiver. Once you've identified the correct ports, use a certified high-speed HDMI cable to connect them. For eARC specifically, a cable rated for 48 gigabits per second bandwidth, usually labeled Ultra High Speed HDMI or HDMI 2.1 certified, is the safe choice. Old cables can cause handshake issues or silently limit the connection's capability even when everything else is correct. If you have an old HDMI cable sitting around from a previous setup, this is the time to replace it with a properly rated one. After the physical connection, go into your TV's audio settings. Find the option for audio output or digital audio output and change it from optical or PCM to HDMI ARC, eARC, or bitstream. The exact label varies by TV brand. On some TVs, particularly Samsung and LG, there's also a specific toggle to enable eARC or to set the output format to auto or pass-through, which tells the TV to send the original encoded audio format rather than converting it to PCM first. Make sure these settings reflect eARC output and bitstream or pass-through mode rather than PCM, because PCM will downgrade the audio before it leaves the TV regardless of which physical connection you're using. Enable HDMI CSC on both the TV and the soundbar or receiver while you're in these menus. Samsung calls it AnyNet Plus. LG calls it SimpLink. Sony calls it BraviaSync. Regardless of the brand name, this feature is what allows one remote control and proper communication between devices over HDMI. With it enabled, your TV remote should control your soundbar's volume, and the TV and soundbar should power on and off together automatically. Once everything is configured, play Atmos content and check what your soundbar or receiver is actually decoding. The front panel display or the soundbar's companion app will show the current audio format. If you're playing a 4K Blu-ray with a TrueHD Atmos track and the display now shows Dolby TrueHD or Dolby Atmos, eARC is working correctly and you're receiving the full lossless format for the first time. If you're watching Netflix or another streaming service with Atmos content and the display shows Dolby Atmos or Dolby Digital Plus Atmos, that's also correct for streaming content. The visible difference between the old optical display showing Dolby Digital and the new eARC display showing Dolby Atmos or Dolby TrueHD is the clearest possible confirmation that the upgrade worked. The full impact of making the switch, what changes when you make this switch correctly? For Blu-ray and lossless content, the improvement is genuinely significant and audible in ways that go beyond test scenarios. Lossless audio contains more detail in complex, dense passages where compressed formats start to simplify and smear the spatial information. The overhead height effects in Atmos content are more precisely rendered because the full object-based data is arriving at the decoder intact rather than being approximated from a compressed stream. Bass has more definition and weight because the low-frequency information in a TrueHD track is reproduced with full fidelity rather than being quantized and compressed. Dialogue has more natural presence and detail in the mid-range. For streaming content, the difference between optical and ARC is primarily the addition of Atmos itself, since optical blocked even the compressed Atmos format. The height effects, the sense of overhead dimension, and the spatial envelopment that Atmos is supposed to create all become available for the first time when streaming through eARC rather than optical. For content that was already reaching your soundbar correctly through optical, like standard Dolby Digital 5.1 from cable TV or broadcast sources, the quality difference is minimal because both connections carry that format adequately. The gain from switching is concentrated in modern formats that optical simply cannot carry. The control improvements from gaining HDMI sec are smaller in audio terms but significant in daily convenience. Using one remote for everything, having the TV and soundbar synchronize their power states, and having reliable lip sync management makes the overall experience feel more polished and intentional rather than requiring constant manual intervention to manage separate devices. Here's the one-sentence summary of everything we covered. If your TV supports eARC and your soundbar or receiver supports Atmos, using optical is the most common and most invisible mistake in modern home theater. And fixing it requires changing one cable and adjusting two settings. Check your TV's HDMI ports tonight and look for the ARC or eARC label. If it's there and your soundbar has a matching input, replace the optical cable with a certified high-speed HDMI cable connected to those specific ports. Set your TV audio output to bitstream or eARC. Enable Sec-C, and then check your soundbar's display when you play Atmos content. The format indicator on that display will tell you immediately whether the switch worked. For many people, this is genuinely the most impactful and cheapest home theater upgrade available, because it costs only a few dollars for a certified cable, but unlocks the full capability of equipment that may have been underperforming for years. If this video helped you identify a connection issue you didn't know you had, hit the like button and share it with someone who has an Atmos soundbar but has never quite understood why it doesn't sound the way they expected. Drop a comment telling me what your display shows before and after making the switch. And subscribe if you haven't already, because there's more practical home theater content exactly like this coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.